I've been asked to talk about the early days after the vote went through for the ordination of women, which was 10 years ago now. There had been real reluctance on the part of the leadership to actually even allowing the vote, because they were afraid that it would divide the church, because there were such polarised views on it. Clearly that didn't happen, or we wouldn't be speaking about it now. There were a couple of city congregations that were campaigning that the vote be taken, but in the end I think it was the rural congregations that carried it through. In a number of places, women were in charge of parishes. They'd been left holding the baby really when there was no longer a paid minister, and they'd ensured that worship life continued and pastoral care kept happening. But it all had to happen under the radar, because officially the ministry of women wasn't being acknowledged. But the country congregations spoke up, the vote was taken, it went through. One of the first things that happened was that there were a couple of women who were working as chaplains in Lutheran schools in lay positions. They were women who had been ordained in Lutheran churches overseas but couldn't have their ordination acknowledged here. They were colloquised, and then in Brisbane a big service held to affirm the ordinations of Silka and Catherine, who were then able to continue in the schools, but as pastors, having full exercise of ministry available to them. An immediate benefit that we saw was on the ecumenical scene. For example, in Roma in Queensland, a Uniting Church and a Lutheran Church congregation had come together and were sharing a minister for a few years, Lutheran for a few years Uniting. But when the Uniting Church had appointed a woman to the position, that relationship had been broken, even though the Lutheran people still went to the combined congregation, but the church officially didn't recognise it anymore. But after the vote went through, that could all be formalised again. And the Australian Lutheran College got very creative. There'd been quite a number of women who'd done their Bachelor of Theology but hadn't been able to study, hadn't been permitted to study the pastoral subjects. So ALC organised a series of intensive workshops so that these women could complete the course, and in addition to using their own lecturers, they brought in some ministers from other denominations where women had been ordained for some time to talk about things like, is there a specific style that women use when preaching? Are there particular self-care issues that apply to women clergy? And once that group of women had completed their course, there was that first ordination, which was just such a joyful day. I suppose really the real work began after that, where just with the work that was going on in parishes, with the women who were appointed, who were called to those places, gradually breaking down the resistance that there had been to the idea of women's ordination. And obviously women ministers are still a minority within the LCA, and we really notice that at pastors' conferences. But it does feel as if things have changed a lot in the 10 years. Just like the incarnation is to do with humanity, not to do with maleness, it's become really obvious that ministry is to do with humanity, not to do with gender.